our video demonstration of the digestive anatomy, and I'm mainly going to use visible body here to demonstrate, although I will use images from the textbook in some cases where visible body isn't doing all that great of a job of showing us the anatomy. So you probably want to print out the PowerPoint that's located on Blackboard, which has screen captures from visible body and also the images from the textbook that I'm going to be going through as we cover this anatomy. And this may just be one long video. I'll see how long-winded I am to determine whether or not I wind up splitting it into more than one. So this will mostly just be anatomy. Function that will be covered over on the physiology lectures for the digestive system. So you should follow along also with your chapter 23 study guide, because this has listed out all the anatomical features of the digestive system that you need to be able to identify and name by typing in the names when you take your chapter 23 exam. A lot of these should be review. You had to learn a lot of these basic components of the digestive system at the very beginning of Biology 201 in Unit 1 when you learn the major organs and structures of the body. So quite a bit of this is review. Some of it will be new. All right, so if we're following along on our on your study guide, the first thing there you need to learn is the alimentary canal. And so if you think about it, your digestive tract, you can also refer to this as the digestive tract. And if you think about it, you have one long continuous tract or tube all the way from the mouth to the anus. And so just kind of roughly, now we're going to go through the different parts of these in more detail. But if you think about it, you go from the mouth to the oropharynx, the laryngopharynx, down into the esophagus, esophagus to the stomach, stomach to the small intestine to the large intestine, and then that of course leads to your anal opening. So all of that together is called the alimentary canal, or sometimes just the digestive tract. Now if we zoom in here on our visible body guy, there are a couple of things I want to point out. The liver, multi-select there, the liver and the gallbladder are not part of the alimentary canal because food does not pass through the liver. The liver is considered an accessory organ of the digestive system because it does produce bile that is used to help us to help dissolve fats that have been consumed in your foods, and we'll talk about that over on the physiology side. And then also, let me see, just select the whole stomach and hide that. And back here behind the stomach, your pancreas, which I'm lighting up in blue there, that's also not technically part of your alimentary canal because food does not pass through the pancreas, but the pancreas produces lots of enzymes that are very important for digesting the foods that we have consumed. So I just wanted to point those things out to you there. Let me bring everybody back. Okay, next item on the list, your GI tract or your gastrointestinal tract. I'm going to hide that. That is referring to the stomach. Let's see, let's highlight my whole stomach, and then your whole small intestine, the whole large intestine. So you're going from stomach through the entire intestinal tract. All of that together would be called the gastrointestinal tract. Gastro or gastric refers to the stomach up here. All right, that is going to bring us to the mouth. And I think I'm going to temporarily, let me get rid of that. I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint. We can start talking about some features of the mouth. All right, first of all, buccal cavity, oral cavity. Some people say buccal or buccal. I've heard different pronunciations. Buccal seems to be the one that is considered to be the most common. This is your oral cavity, your mouth cavity. Now sometimes some people will be a little pickier and say, well, the buccal cavity is really the space surrounding, the outside of the teeth and the gums between there and your cheeks, and then the oral cavity is going to be between the the palate, the roof of your mouth, and the tongue. All of that space in there would be more specifically the oral cavity, but then other anatomists, it seems like most people just buckle oral cavity all together, cheeks and the space there in between the tongue and the roof of the mouth all together. All of that can be considered the buccal or the oral cavity, so we'll just go with that. All right, roof of the mouth. Oops. Hang on. Okay. Roof of the mouth. It's called the palate, and about the front 2/3 would be your hard palate. And if you remember, that's because you have the palatine process that's formed from your left and your right maxilla, and also your palatine bones, those two palatine bones, if you remember those. You have a bony surface there that's covered obviously in soft tissues, but that's called your hard palate. And then backwards from there, you don't have any bone forming a portion of the roof of the mouth. So back in here, you have your soft palate. So there's no bone underlying that. And this little flap that hangs down at the back of the mouth is called the uvula. When you swallow, the uvula flaps upward like this, and it closes off the nasopharynx, so it prevents food and liquids that you're swallowing from moving upward into the nasopharynx. That's why if somebody makes you laugh while you're swallowing liquids, the uvula opens up and some of that liquid can go up your nasopharynx and then come out your nasal cavity. I'm sure most of us have had that happen at least once during our lifetimes. All right, then how about the tongue? We're not going to get too involved with the tongue here. I'm sure everybody can identify the tongue. The little bumps on the tongue that you see scattered around here, those are called papillae. Papilla is singular. That's a bump or a hill. Maybe you remember the papillary sublayer of the dermis of the skin that pokes up into the epidermis and kind of looks like hills. So those are the bumps that you see on the tongues, and within those you have taste buds. And taste buds are little specialized sensory nervous system structures that detect chemicals that we interpret as sweet, salty, sour, and then there's a fourth type of taste bud that detects something called umami, which is less definable or recognizable. Some people associate that with richness of foods, like foods that are creamy and fatty tend to stimulate umami taste buds. Monosodium glutamate, MSG, which is put in a lot of times American Chinese restaurants put MSG in a lot of their foods to sort of enhance the flavor, and that is also supposed to stimulate your umami taste buds as well. Protein-rich foods will stimulate those, and it's a little bit less definable than salty and sour and sweet. But your taste buds are located within those papillae. All right, how about your gums? I imagine we all know where our gums are. Let's see, hang on. Oops, going the wrong way. We all know where our gums are, but the gums are also called the gingivae. Gingiva is singular. Gingivae is plural. If you have inflammation of the gums, that's called gingivitis. And of course, your teeth are embedded in the gums. So now we'll talk about our teeth for a couple of minutes. When you are a child, you eventually end up with 20 deciduous teeth. Those are your baby teeth. And you have 10 of those on top, 10 of those on the bottom. And so you're seeing it's like a top row there. Different sizes for different functions. So we're not going to identify all those different deciduous or baby teeth. but they do have names and functions similar to the permanent ones. Then, of course, as you guys know, those fall out, and then your permanent teeth come in later, and this is what you see over here. You have 16 permanent teeth on top and bottom. If you still have all of them. All right, and then they have 4 major types, and we'll talk about these. You have your incisors, and here you're seeing the main part of the tooth, the crown and the root that goes down into the gums. Canines, bicuspids or premolars, then you have your cuspids or your molars. Okay, wait, scratch that. Your molars are not canines, can also be called cuspids. Molars, you have 3 of those on each side at the back of the top of the mouth up there. Tooth number 1, they're numbered 1 through 32. Tooth number 1 is on the right hand side, way at the back. And then they're numbered all the way around like this to tooth number 16. Then you drop down to the lower jaw. Tooth number 17 is way in the back on the left hand side. And then you circle all the way back around, and tooth number 32 is lower jaw, way back over here on the right hand side. So that's how your teeth are numbered. Okay, and then you've got in the very back, you have 3, 3, 3, and 3. Those are your molars. And the very back teeth are your wisdom teeth. Those are the ones that a lot of us have taken out. Okay. You erase those. If you move forward from there, the next 2 on each side, there and there, there and there, and there and there. All of those are your bicuspids or your premolars. So you're going to have 8 of those in total. If you have your wisdom teeth, you have 12 molars. If you've had your wisdom teeth taken out, then you have 8 molars. You have 8 premolars, unless you've had some kind of dental work done to change those numbers. Sometimes you do if your teeth are kind of crowded in your mouth. All right, then moving forward from there, right there, right there, right there, and right there. Those are your canines, also known as cuspids. So you have 4 of those in total. And then finally, your 4 front teeth, your 4 central bottom teeth, those are called incisors. Those are cutting teeth for cutting your food. Okay, and you have 2 central and 2 lateral, top and bottom. 8 in total. All right, so these are your 2 central incisors on the top, the 2 central incisors on the bottom, and then lateral, 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 and lateral. Okay, so teeth are not too hard. You just have to, you probably heard some of that terminology before. So just learn the names of your teeth and learn the numbering. Those of you who are going into nursing may be wondering, why in the world do I have to learn the names of all of these teeth and so forth? And you never know what area of nursing you might work in, but we do have quite a few students at Calhoun who are going into dental hygiene programs. So they need to know their tooth info. All right, next on the anatomy study guide, if we zoom in, what are more specific parts of an individual tooth? Okay, so here we have a tooth, and here's the bone that the tooth is embedded in, which will be your maxilla on the top, left or right maxilla, mandible on the bottom. And then here we have the gingiva. or the gum line. The crown of the tooth is the part that's above the gum line, which makes sense. And then the crown is covered with enamel. All right, so that's the white, very hard substance. That's the hardest substance produced in the body, and that coats the crowns of our teeth. Of course, that wears down over time, and depending on what kind of beverages you drink, acidic beverages tend to wear it down a little faster. Smoking tends to wear it down. So tends to disappear with age. Now, underneath there in blue, that's called dentin. So that's primarily what your tooth is composed of. That is also a hard bone-like substance. Has a little bit more of a yellowish tinge to it. That's why if your enamel wears out over time, the dentin becomes exposed and your teeth take on a more of a yellowish color. Now down here in the tooth socket, the joint between the tooth and the bone, there is a ligament in here. Make sure I'm not leaving anything else. That's called the periodontal ligament. All right, so that consists of dense connective tissue, which is anchoring the tooth, helping the tooth stay in its tooth socket, and is the bridging tissue between the tooth and the surrounding bone. And then that yellow strip there is a hard, sticky substance called cementum that connects the tooth, the root of the tooth, to the periodontal ligament between those two. Let's see. Let me erase some of this because it's getting a little busy here on the slide. So all of this portion of the tooth is called the root. In the central part of the tooth here, that's called the pulp. And the pulp of the tooth contains blood vessels and nerves, as you can see there. That's why dental work tends to be painful at times. And this little passageway through the dentin that leads to the pulp is called the root canal. And you probably no doubt heard of people having root canal work at the dentist if they wind up with an infection there in the pulp. Sometimes they have to have work done on their root canals. All right, so that looks like we have covered all of the different parts you need to be able to identify on teeth. We're going to move on to the salivary glands, and we're look at some other features up in the mouth and head region. I'm bringing visible body back up here. All right, so our salivary glands. So when you took Biology 201, you were supposed to have covered salivary glands at the beginning, but you didn't learn the names of the individual types of salivary glands. And so here you are. So on the left side and over here on the right side, those are your parotid salivary glands, if you're following along with your study guide. And these are exocrine glands. They produce saliva. And one nice thing here about visible body, if I click there, that is the duct that carries the saliva produced by this parotid salivary gland over to the oral cavity and squirts it onto the inside of the mouth. And you have one of those over here as well. All right, how about your other salivary glands? You've got a pair of salivary glands underneath the tongue. All right, right there I'm highlighting the mandible, so I'm going to hide that so we can see these salivary glands down in here. All right, so underneath the tongue, there's the tongue. Well, actually, that was highlighting the bottom of the oral cavity, but the tongue is up here, as you guys know. So there you have a left sublingual. Lingual refers to the tongue, so sublingual is underneath the tongue. And over on the right, you have one of those as well. So those are there underneath the tongue. And then underneath the mandible, you have right here and right here, those are submandibular salivary glands. You have one of those on the left and one of those on the right. And right there, you have pretty long ducts that extend from those two glands upward, carrying saliva up here to the oral cavity to dump it into the oral cavity. All right, if we turn our head back around this way, the next two items on our study guide, oropharynx and laryngopharynx, which you guys have learned those before. Your oropharynx is right in there. That's the back behind the oral cavity, back behind the uvula, the back of the throat. And that compartment is shared with the respiratory system. That leads down to, let's deselect that one, the laryngopharynx. And again, that compartment is shared between the respiratory and the digestive systems. The larynx is over here anterior to that structure. That then leads to the esophagus, which is going to carry food down toward the stomach. Okay? And remember, your esophagus is posterior to the trachea, and then it extends downward through the mediastinum, back behind the heart, actually travels behind the heart, and then it's going to have to pass through the diaphragm. And let's see, what will be the best view to bring up here? Maybe this one. Let's see. Let me pause here for. Okay, this is probably going to be our best view here for seeing the relationship between the esophagus and the stomach. So we zoom back out up here. All right, so there's your esophagus, this long tube, and again, that's passing behind the heart through the mediastinum. And then not shown on here, if you guys remember from your respiratory anatomy, the diaphragm is going to be sitting right in here. So there's a hole in the diaphragm that the esophagus has to pass through, and that is called the esophageal hiatus. So you should be able to identify that feature. Just the hole in the diaphragm that would be sitting right in there. And then that leads us to the stomach. Now there is a, let me zoom in here. We hide this bone, get rid of the bone. Oops, looks like let me go back and show everybody again. I'm going to dissect out some of these ribs, and there's part of the liver. We're going to get rid of that as well. Goodbye, liver pieces. All right, so here's the esophagus, and we're going to head down in here into the stomach, and there is a area right in here that functions as a sphincter. So you've got circular muscles there that can open and close, and that is called the gastroesophageal sphincter. Some sources call it the cardiac sphincter because the heart is sitting just up here right above it. So this is sometimes called the cardiac region of the stomach. And then some sources just call it the esophageal sphincter. But then that opens and closes. And a main function is to prevent backflow, contents in the stomach. You don't want all the acidic contents in the stomach backflowing up this way into the esophagus. If you do have that happening, that's called reflux. So that sphincter helps prevent that from occurring. All right, so we pass down in here into the stomach. Now we have three main regions in the stomach. Let's see, I'm not going to be able to highlight those in visible body. Bring up my pen here for a second. All right, this upper dome region of the stomach is called the fundus. We'll hear fundus again later when we do the reproductive system because the uterus has a fundus. Main portion of the stomach in here is called the body. And this third section of the stomach that's leading towards the small intestine is called the pylorus. Okay, so those are the three major regions of the stomach. All right, and let me see, visible body, I think, yeah, it's going to let me click in here so we can look inside the stomach and see what that looks like. Also, visible body here is showing the muscular wall of the stomach. The stomach wall has a lot of smooth muscle tissue in it, and it has 3 different layers, with those muscle tissues being running in different directions, which help the stomach with its various functions. It actually has to be able to slosh food back and forth to help with the early digestive processes that are taking place. If you've ever seen the inside lining of the stomach, do you see how it's folded in here? That's what it looks like when the stomach is empty. As the stomach fills with food and liquids, it expands and those wrinkles go away. But those wrinkles are called rugae. And this inner lining that you see, you have an epithelial lining along the inside of the stomach. That is a mucosal membrane. You have a mucosal lining there, and that is called the gastric mucosa. That's the epithelial inner lining of the stomach. Okay, so I'm going to, this is the large intestine, and I'm going to hide that, dissect that off for a moment. Because as food is passing through the stomach, it's mixing with stomach acid and some enzymes in here that you'll be learning about over on the physiology side. The next place it needs to go is over here. This is the duodenum, the first section of the small intestine. So there is a feature here, oops, right in here. There's a sphincter. You do need to learn the different sphincters of the alimentary canal. And this is called the pyloric sphincter. So when it's closed, the contents of the stomach cannot pass into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. When it opens up, it admits little small volumes of the stomach contents down here into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. All right, I'm going to bring back up this PowerPoint for a minute because we're going to move on and start talking about the intestinal anatomy. And the next item on the list, mesentery and greater omentum. Now you heard about mesentery when we were learning the superior mesenteric and the inferior mesenteric arteries and veins. Because the blood vessels that supply blood to the walls of the small intestine and the large intestine are largely contained within a sheets of tissue called the mesentery. The mesentery also helps anchor the small and the large intestine in the abdominopelvic cavity and helps keep it in place so it's not just all sloshing around in there. I mean, the small intestine is many feet long, so you don't want all that stuff just rolling around randomly inside there. So in this diagram from your textbook, this is showing you if you cut somebody open and lifted the intestines out of the way, what you see right in here, all of that is mesentery. It's a double fold of the peritoneal membranes that anchor the, that contact the organs of the abdominopelvic cavity and line the peritoneal cavity itself. Okay, and then another another structure that is composed of multiple folds of the serous membranes of the abdominopelvic cavity is called the greater omentum. And you see all this yellow looking tissue here that has been kind of flapped upward? That's the greater omentum. If I bring up visible body over here for a second, let's see, here we go. Sorry about that, hazards of recording at home. You get phone calls coming in. All right, so on this view from visible body, this yellowish structure that you see here is the greater omentum. That hangs down over the small and the large intestine, and also consists of those peritoneal serous membranes in multiple layers, but they're just hanging over the front, whereas the mesentery tends to anchor the large and the small intestine in the back. All right, so moving now back to the small intestine, I guess I'll just stay here in this view. I'm going to hide my greater omentum, and let me temporarily go back here and hide that part of the large intestine. Okay. The small intestine, as you hopefully learned in Biology 201, consists of three major regions. So the first one is right here. So it's not very long. That's called the duodenum. So the stomach contents get squirted past the pyloric sphincter in here into the duodenum. All right, and then the next stretch of the small intestine that I'm highlighting there is called the jejunum. Okay, and then the third segment is called the ileum. So, and again, those were things you were supposed to learn in Biology 201, and hopefully that's just review for you. Don't worry about the exact borders of the jejunum and the ileum. Those would be hard to determine just by looking at it, but you should know the order of those three segments. And also the ileum leads to the large intestine over here. So if you got an arrow pointing to a portion of the small intestine that's obviously connecting into the large intestine, then you know that is part of the ileum right there. Or if you've got an arrow up here that's pointing to this part of the small intestine, and I may tell you this is part of the second section of the small intestine, then you know that's jejunum rather than ileum. Okay, let's see. All right, now we're going to flip over and take a look at the interior surface lining of the small intestine. And so these are some pictures from your textbook. And kind of like you have the rugae in the stomach, the small intestine, though, always has these circular folds along the inside lining. Those are called circular folds. But at a much smaller level, if you zoom in along those circular folds and blow those up over here, you would see that the inner lining of the small intestine, which is also called the intestinal mucosa, because it's a mucosal membrane, it has these projections all over the place that extend upward. And those are called villi. A villus is singular. And each of those villi is labeled, not labeled, is covered with or lined with epithelial cells. So you have a very thin epithelial lining that I'm tracing there with the stylus. Those are simple columnar epithelial cells which face the lumen, the space in here inside the small intestine. And those cells play important roles in finishing up digestion of nutrients and also absorbing the nutrients out of the lumen of the small intestine and transferring them in here inside the wall of the small intestine to the blood vessels and lymphatic vessels that you see there. And we will be talking a whole lot more about that over on the physiology side. So those are the internal features of the small intestine that are listed on your study guide. All right, if we go back to visible body, bring everything back up. And I'm going to hide my greater omentum again. All right, we said the third section of the small intestine is the ileum. And so contents are passing through there and they're headed over here to the large intestine. And, all right, deselect all. The first portion of the large intestine is called the cecum that you see there. And that little tail-like appendage that's hanging off of the cecum, that is the appendix, or sometimes called the vermiform appendix. So right in there in light blue, that's the appendix. And again, that should be a review from Biology 201. Now there is a valve, which visible body is not going to highlight for us. But right here where the ileum is connecting to the large intestine, there is a valve right there called the ileocecal valve. That's on your study guide as well. And so as that opens, then contents come from the ileum over here into this first section of the colon, also called the cecum. Okay, the large intestine, let's deselect all of those. The best thing to do with the large intestine is just learn it in order from in terms of how food waste will be passing through the colon. So it's going to enter from the ileocecal valve. The first section of the colon is called the cecum. These pouches that you see how the colon is divided up into these pouch-like structures? Each of those is called a haustra, and haustri is plural. The next stretch of the colon is called the ascending colon, because as the walls of the colon contract, there's squeezing the feces that are developing upward this way. And then right up here, notice how the colon is making a turn over this way into the transverse colon, which runs across. So that turn is called the splenic flexure, hepatic flexure, hepatic, not splenic, because it's hepatic refers to the liver, so it's over here near the liver. All right, so the feces keep getting squeezed across this way, and now you have another turn over here. This is called the splenic flexure, where the transverse colon is turning down into the descending colon. So that turn is called the splenic flexure. The spleen is not shown here, but it's located up in that area. All right, you keep going down the colon. The next part of the colon is down here, where you make this S-shaped curve, which you can see a little bit better as you rotate around there in visible body. That's called the sigmoid colon. And then finally, the sigmoid colon is leading to the rectum, highlighted in blue there. And then the rectum leads to the anal canal, from which the feces will come out. Okay, I think I hit all of the different parts of the large intestine. The inner lining of the large intestine would be called the mucosa. Again, it's a mucous membrane. It's composed of epithelial tissue lining the lumen, the space inside the colon. All right, accessory organs. We need to talk about the liver and the pancreas and the gallbladder, because they do have accessory roles in digestion. So let's move up here to the liver, and I'm going to need to get rid of these ribs so we can see the liver a little bit better. Liver is a pretty large organ, and it consists of 4 lobes. I think I'm going to get rid of the whole large intestine there. The biggest lobe is over here. This is the right lobe of the liver. This is the left lobe of the liver. That's not too hard to remember. Now the other lobes are on the underside. So actually I think I'm going to hide the whole small intestine, and I think I'm going to go ahead and hide the whole stomach as well, so we can see under here a little bit better. All right, so there is a lobe on the underside of the liver here. I'm rotating it around this way, and it's next to the gallbladder. There's your gallbladder right there. But that lobe is called the quadrate lobe. Quad, like a 4-sided figure, so it has kind of a square or rectangular like shape. All right, and then we'll deselect that, get rid of that, and let's see, hide some more of these blood vessels. And then right in there, there's another lobe of the liver that kind of looks like a tail, has almost a tail-like feature associated with it, and that's called the caudate lobe of the liver. All right, so quadrate, and then here's the caudate lobe of the liver back there. All right. Gallbladder. Right in here. So the gallbladder stores bile that has been made in the liver, and bile has to be transported through a series of ducts. DUCT, duct. And so if we zoom in here on the liver, so the liver actually makes bile. Let me see if I can hide that. Oops, didn't want to do that. Okay. Changed views a little bit here. Let's hide that. There we go. So I just stripped off a big portion of the liver because I want to show you what's inside. So right here and right here you have two hepatic ducts that contain bile. So bile is produced by the cells in the liver, and it passes through little microscopic channels that bring that bile eventually to a left hepatic duct and a right hepatic duct over here. And those come together and lead to this little, let me deselect those, and lead to that little duct, which is called the common hepatic duct, because it's collecting bile from both the left and the right ducts, which come together to form a common hepatic duct. Bile gets stored over here in the gallbladder, so it will pass through this duct, and that's called the cystic duct, which extends from the gallbladder this way over here. The common hepatic duct and the cystic duct converge together to form the common bile duct. That's what's highlighted there in blue. Some sources just call that the bile duct. If you hear about somebody having bile duct cancer, that's a cancer that has developed in that particular tube. So the cystic duct and the common hepatic duct merge together to form the common bile duct, although your textbook is just referring to it as the bile duct in general. All right, then where does that common bile duct go? Let me hide the stomach. And I actually want to show, all right, let's see. Let me fade the pancreas so you can see what's going on inside the pancreas in here. So kind of follow along with the cursor. There's your common bile duct, and it's traveling. If we kind of rotate around, you can see it's actually inside the pancreas, passing through the pancreas, and it leads to a structure. I'm going to now hide the pancreas. There's a structure right in here called the hepatopancreatic ampulla, which is where the bile ends up just before it's going to enter the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, which you're only seeing part of that right there. Most of it's been taken away. All right, so the common bile duct leads to the hepatopancreatic ampulla. There is a sphincter right in here called the hepatopancreatic sphincter, and when that opens, it allows bile to pass into the duodenum, where it's going to be used to help dissolve or emulsify the fats that are coming into the duodenum from the stomach. All right, and then on the pancreas, let me bring our pancreas back up here. Let's see. Bring the whole pancreas up here. Okay. We're back. There's the pancreas. The pancreas sits behind the stomach. And again, if I fade the pancreas, these brown tubes that you see inside there, with the smaller tubes extending off of them, that main brown tube that you see right in there is called the pancreatic duct. And most of the pancreas, most of the cells in the pancreas produce digestive enzymes and fluids that make up what's called pancreatic juice, which is very important for digestion. And all those fluids and enzymes drain away from different parts of the pancreas and into this long pancreatic duct that I'm tracing there with the arrow. And that pancreatic duct, if you notice, we zoom in really closely, following along with the arrow there, it merges together with the common bile duct to form that hepatopancreatic ampulla. An ampulla is like named for an ampule, like a little storage container, usually made out of glass. You may have seen an ampule before in a lab. So those two, pancreatic duct, common bile duct, converge together to form the hepatopancreatic ampulla, and then there's a hepatopancreatic sphincter there that opens to release those contents into the duodenum for digestion. Your textbook has a very good diagram of that as well. All right, so I think we have covered all of the required information for the digestive system anatomy. And there will be a practice activity on Blackboard for you to review before you take the test. And as always, many of the images and so forth will be similar to what you're going to have on the exam. So be sure you practice with that identification before you actually go to take the real exam. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.